Welcome everybody to our How Can I Help You Right Now live webinar series. I'm your host, Aldine Simmons-Thorpe, transformation business coach. And today I've got a really good friend of mine and as our guest actually, Rox Bartel from the Impact Bank. And I'm sure she's gonna tell you a little bit more about why her company is called Impact Bank. And today we'll be talking about resilience. 3 tricks to increasing your resiliency in times of uncertainty. So just a quick word before we hop into the presentation. So I want to thank our event co-producers. We've got Startup Peel, powered by Startup Canada, Enunciate, a AI language testing platform, my company, Aldine Simmons-Thorpe Consulting, and ITS Global. We've got Ross on the line. They are a recruitment and staffing firm here in the GTA. So before we hop over to Rox's presentation, I just want to share a little bit about who I am and why we started the series. So I'm a transformation business coach with over a decade of experience in HR, ops, and strategy, working primarily with startups, scale-ups, and small to medium-sized businesses. And I've earned the title of trusted advisor, having worked with these different business owners with the ability to combine strategy, planning, and action to create real results. As we have been navigating, through COVID and post-COVID, this series was put together by the co-producers mentioned above to really help small to medium-sized businesses and startups and scale-ups as well really find practical and actionable advice that they could use right away to move their businesses forward. And so that brings us to our guest, Rox Bartel, and she's the chief booster and holder of space. I'm sure she'll tell us a little bit more about what that is. And she's the principal at the Impact Bank. And for 25 years, she's navigated and built a progressive career in 4 distinct sectors, including entrepreneurship. In the last 5 years, though, she's transitioned into organizational change. And she also coaches 30 to 35-year-olds who are anxious to make their mark on the world. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Rox.
Thank you, Aldine. I want to say first and foremost that I may go a few minutes over because there's so much to talk about with resilience that I'm literally putting together a 4.5-hour broken into 3 sections workshop for later in July and August, because this is really rich material. So I hope you'll indulge me because I don't want you to miss out on any that I planned for this 30 minutes. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time telling you about Impact Bank, although the story behind the name is good, and also about specifically what I do, but I will introduce a little bit about myself. But first I want to talk about resilience. It's kind of a hot subject right now. And I think because people are expecting us all to be resilient. So when I work with organizations right now on the issue of resilience and performance, what I hear periodically is maybe not intentional, but a way of weaponizing it. Like, are we measuring who is really navigating this well? So if you ever feel like there's judgment around whether you're being resilient or not, I want to tell you, not only now, but always look at and be self-compassionate about it. Look at what you can do differently, what you can learn, but always give yourself a break, because these things do not come easily. And I think you'll see as I go through how resilience kind of is taken away and diminished. You'll see how readily it happens to all of us. Building resilient organizations requires people to be resilient. And so I focus largely on people in what we talk about today. But whatever you do, don't allow it to be weaponized against you or for you to do that to others. We all are working our best to be as resilient as we can. So we're facing uncertain times. And I want you to know what I want you to take away. Is everyone able to see my screen? I can't see your faces, so I'm going to assume that you'll let me know if you can't, or that Aldine will come on.
Nice, bright colors.
Yeah, there we go. So if you want to make the pictures on the right or wherever they are in your screen smaller, just click to make them smaller so you don't miss any of my slides. So the takeaways I want is first for you to see the role of the social brain, because our brain is a social brain, in enhancing or depleting our resilience. I want you to walk away today understanding how a pandemic pandemic specifically reveals and teaches us about why developing resilience matters. And I want you to walk away with 3 related but separate tips to change the way we look at things so that you can expand and transfer your resilience to others and throughout your life. So first, a little bit about me. Now, you can go on my website, impactbank.ca, and you'll see both an audible about me and a written about me, and you'll read about how I came up with the name Impact Bank. And I decided that since that's all there on the website, you can go and listen to the audio version of it or read it. The audio version is quite different from the written because when we talk to people, we talk differently than we write. So I wanted to honor that in my website. So first thing I want you to know about me is that I'm a performance coach. About midway through my career in my mid-30s, I was given a wonderful opportunity to create my own department called performance consulting in a large multinational company. So I hired data scientists and statisticians and people who were very skilled at executing solutions and taking them out into the operation anywhere in the world. And so it only made sense when I left my executive position 7 years ago to start with performance consulting because I know that space very, very well. And then I became certified as a coach, and now I offer coaching to executives, but also, as Aldine said, to people who I call millennials, like they're part of what is typically our millennial group, who have enough experience to know that they would benefit from walking beside someone like me as they think through things so that they can move their career to the next level. The second thing you want to know about me is I love spirited conversation. And while this is more one way today, I really love a spirited conversation because I think we have the greatest insights. This goes to that social brain I'm going to be talking about in a minute. We get our most meaningful insights in this world and learning when we're in spirited discussions or conversations. And third, I am a Habs fan. I know for Torontonians, it sounds like I have bad judgment. So if you want to make draw that conclusion, you wouldn't be the first. And my dad was a lifelong Leaf fan, but I became a Habs fan, a Montreal Canadiens fan, in diapers, I suspect, because he and I could battle then. And of course, that brings me back to loving spirited conversations. And we had many of them. So that's just a little bit about me. But what's really important is for you to know why you want to learn about resilience. So I hope this resonates for you. But I remember Simon Sinek always talks about how the what doesn't matter very much if we don't know our why. Why are we wanting to learn this? So why resilience matters to me is really powerful thing to think about. I have found that when people feel resilient, when they are behaving in resilient ways, that their performance increases dramatically. Businesses that build a culture around resilience perform at a much higher level than businesses that don't. Happiness is expanded. And who doesn't want more happiness? It's expanded when you feel like you are resilient, when you see yourself conquering things every day that are challenging. That it makes happiness grow in us, right? We glow in it. And meaning, we're all looking for meaning in life. Well, when we're resilient and we conquer things, we really do find the insights that drive meaning. So performance, happiness, and meaning rely on the development and maintenance of our resilience. So I hope that why resonates for you all. Then we need to understand what it is. And right after I'm done talking a little bit about this, we're going to do a poll so you can identify where you are right now in your level of resilience. So first of all, some will call resilience an attitude, the attitude you bring into the world, right? Like the attitude with which you approach everything. I am one of those people. I think it is primarily an attitude we choose every day. Some will say it's a mindset. And I think there's lots of evidence to that too, because the way our mind interprets, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later, what's happening around us really is either driven by a resilient, optimistic, as Dr. Martin Seligman calls it, approach, and that keeps us resilient. Some will say it's a belief structure. that it is the way we believe our work ethic is required. And others, I just recently, when working with a number of senior leaders, had one of them say they want to make it a competency that HR measures in their organization because it is so core to performance. So whether it's an attitude, mindset, belief structure, or competency, it is what prepares and allows us all to persist. And persistence, tenacity, is key to resilience. But it's not just being tenacious. It's what we're tenacious for. So notice I put there on what matters, because do not use up your resilient attitude, mindset, or whatever on that which doesn't really matter. Too many people do that, and then they have no gas left in the tank. So it allows us to persist on what matters. And here's another key thing, especially when getting what matters done gets difficult, like in a pandemic, right? So that is how I'm suggesting we define it. And I'm going to ask that Aldine put up the poll so that everyone has a chance to, and I thought we'd do this in a matter of seconds but because we're doing it this way, it might take us a little longer. So let's see how people are feeling today. And if you can write it in the chat, that would be great. And Aldine, if you can watch the chat for me, I'm realizing I don't have easy access to it.
I got you, Rox.
Where are you on a scale of 1 to 7? And so what Aldine's going to put up is a scale of 1 to 7. So you can identify 7 being I'm feeling fully resilient and happy to move forward in a resilient, persistent way, and 1 being I'm really not feeling it or experiencing it. Do we have the poll up?
We do.
Okay.
All right, we have some responses hopping in.
Okay. So people are feeling pretty resilient. That's wonderful.
Yeah, I think one of my big questions is how do I get my coworkers and colleagues getting closer to my 6?
Well, I'm going to offer a couple of ideas on that. Okay, so everyone's pretty resilient. So I feel like I can just take the rest of the hour off. But let's keep going, because maybe there'll be a few tricks that will make it more sustainable for you. Oh, I see another message come up in the chat. Okay, so 5s and 6s. So let's keep going then and talk about, oops, where we go. Oops, I don't, do I have access to the screen now? There we go. So the first tip, what I'm encouraging people to do, because we have social brains, is to start a practice of observing how your brain interprets what's happening. And the reason I say that is that Dr. Lieberman, Matt Lieberman out of UCLA, he put out a book called Social. And he shows through his research with fMRI data that in fact we are all incredibly social, that we are constantly scanning the room. I can't see you all right now, but we're all scanning the room to see if people are happy to see us or not, whether they're feeling connected to us or not, and we make judgments based on what we see. Based on how we feel in a room, our social brain is either triggered, right, into fight, flight, or fear, or freeze, or we're feeling active and motivated and engaged, and that's what makes us more resilient. So the trick is to get more into the motivated side of it. And I always love this quote from neuroscientist Daniel Siegel, who says our mind uses our brain to create itself. So where's our mind? Well, most of us just assume, I think, from everyone I talk to, that it's in our brain, but it is actually separate from our brain. It can observe what our brain is doing. It can observe what our body is doing. It can observe what's happening in our emotions, which are triggered in our brain, and it can also observe what's happening in our spiritual life. So we need to recognize that we have this mind. Many of us think of our mind as our identity. It isn't entirely, but it is the way that we perceive things or the way that we interpret. So if we use our mind to see how our brain is interpreting things rather than reacting, right, then we can be more resilient. I, I'll give you a quick story. During the pandemic, my one sister who lives here in Toronto with me, or not with me, but we both live here, are looking out for my 90-year-old mother. And so we've had a couple of interactions that haven't gone perfectly. And I remember, about a couple of weeks ago, I started feeling like I was being dismissed and I was getting hostile reactions. So I thought about it. I processed the 3 examples I had on it because my brain was interpreting it as hostility and dismissiveness. And my mind, though, thought that's probably not right because I know enough about how our brain works that I decided to check it out. So first I checked it out with my own mind and processed the experiences, but I still landed in the same place. So I thought, I need to ask for social help from my sister to help me understand what's going on. So I asked for a phone call to discuss it. So she needed a private space so we could actually talk. And I laid out what I was observing and how I was interpreting it. And then the 3 examples that really jumped out at me. Turns out one of them, she was feeling hostile towards me, and we quickly talked through what had happened and why she felt that way. The other 2 had been about something entirely different, not personal to me at all. And once I understood it, I was able to calm down about it. My brain no longer felt that social pain of my sister being hostile with me. And so when our mind observes our brain and helps interpret what's going on, we're able to become more resilient. So one of the things that we want to understand is that resilient people use their mind to harness their brain. Evie and Gordon came up with this model about how the brain organizes things. And there are 6 domains. We're only going to talk about one of them today, but there are 6 domains in his model. And the Neuro Leadership Institute clearly identifies that when we're in threat mode in any one of those domains, like certainty is the one we're looking at today, when we're in threat mode, our reptilian brain, here's the limbic system of our brain. It's right at the core, the very basic part of our brain. And it goes into that fight, flight, or freeze mode, and we react. We don't think through things. In fact, everything's hazy to us. If we can get over here into our prefrontal cortex area and the right side and fill it with dopamine and feel better, we're able to think more clearly. We're able to operate with more of a sense of resilience. And the Neuro Leadership Institute identifies 4 basic categories where we need to be mindful when it comes to certainty. If we want to move from threat to reward, we need to recognize that what looks different when we're feeling threatened by perception, when we can't see clearly, when our field of view is clouded by by the threat, like how I felt about my sister. Our cognition, our ability to keep a working memory and remember what we needed to say to a group. We can't work very well with others or problem solve in the workplace if our cognition is hazy. Creativity, insights, we want those to flow, and they don't flow when we're feeling uncertain about things. And of course, collaboration with others comes to a standstill because people are feeling threatened and they don't trust each other. So what we need to do is remember all 4 of these and how important they are so that we do the work to move people to reward. So before we talk about how to move people to reward, I want to just share a little bit about this one of the 6 domains, knowing what to expect. And I wanted to share these 8 because if you go through, I'm not going to read them, but if you go through this list, you will see that all of these 8, and these are 8 of the top 15 debilitating uncertainties that human beings encounter. We are dealing with all 8 of these, not just individually, but collectively. So it's like a pandemic that has a virus that is infectious, but also this kind of issue of our own resilience that is widespread, and we're fueling each other in feeling uncertain and fear about all of these 8. So what are some of the things we can do? Knowing what to expect is what we want to create in our workplaces, in our own mind, right? How our mind is looking at things. We want to move more to knowing what to expect. So what can you do to move a team? Let's talk about a team, because you can apply this to yourself as well. So the first thing is communicate more often and better than ever. So be effective and succinct in your communication. And if you do, if you're working with a team and you communicate with them in one meeting a week, maybe have 3 short, brief, and clear meetings. Number 2, steer in an adaptive direction. The more people are talking about how can we adapt how we do things to do them more effectively, the more you move their brain to be thinking in an adaptive way, which is stimulating. And it actually, if people can share their ideas even, they feel like they're part of the solution instead of focusing on what's falling apart. Exaggerate empathy. Like most of us think we sometimes exaggerate it, but rarely do. And if you're doing so digitally, be careful not to patronize people, be more subtle, and be more pointed about what it is that you are expressing your empathy about. Fourthly, set clear expectations for yourself and others about the conversation cadence. You want to make sure that everyone knows what's expected, especially in digital meetings. And the fifth one, make the implicit as explicit as possible. Okay, so here's the interesting thing when I work with leaders, is that they often, when I say, well, did you share that with the team? Do they know your intention on that and what you're trying to accomplish? Well, isn't it obvious? And I always love that when they throw their hands up and they say, isn't it obvious? And I'm like, no, you need to make, especially if change is occurring, like in a pandemic, you need to make the implicit explicit. And an individual story, I have a dear friend who lives in Spain, and when the pandemic hit, it hit them pretty hard. And he and I started talking together over WhatsApp at least once a week, at least. And this past Saturday morning, and it's much later in Spain, he'd sent me a quick WhatsApp note saying, I need to talk, I'm falling apart. And I thought, oh, he's falling apart. So I quickly sent him a note because it was 6 a.m. and said, listen, I need till 10, but I will call you at 10 my time. And when we got on the phone, he seemed okay. And I said, so you don't feel, it doesn't sound like you're falling apart. And he said, well, I'm not anymore, because when I realized I was going to be talking with you at 10, I started channeling you in my head. And I knew you were going to say to me, start writing down why you're feeling what you're feeling and get really explicit about what it is you want and need to have changed. And he said, so I'm already feeling better, but can I talk to you about my list? Because I just would love your thoughts. So we all need to make the implicit, the things that are clouding our judgment in our mind right now, make them explicit, because it allows us to find some certainty in a world of total uncertainty right now. And sixth, make virtual meetings more social. Like Aldine's going to be putting you all in partnered up later. Give people as many chances as possible in meetings to recreate what is social, what is normally very social, and plan for it. So those are a few things, hopefully, Aldine, from your point about hoping that you can support others in being more resilient. Here are a few things you can do right now in the way that you conduct meetings or engage digitally. So before we talk about helplessness, I do want to say that I met with a group of executives not that long ago, and one of them in this company said, all of a sudden he decided he wanted to be really open and transparent with me and with the rest of the group, and he said, you know what I'm worried about most is that people are going to lose their work ethic. They're going to get lazy. He didn't use the word lazy. I can't remember the word he used, but I heard lazy, because they've been off and we've been slacking off on things, and they're just not going to have their work ethic. And what I heard in my head is he was afraid of learned helplessness. And that is actually a very real issue around resilience. And I don't think that that's what his team necessarily would do, but that's what he feared most. And here's the thing, it's actually a concept that's been studied by Dr. Martin Seligman. And so I want to share a quick story of how I was first introduced, didn't realize it at the time until years later, in fact. But when I was 13, I was going out cycling with a few of my friends. They were all guy friends, and one of them I had a crush on. So when we're 13, think about when you were 13 and you're starting to individuate from your family, from your parents, but there's always that tug of war. So I decided as I was leaving to go meet them that I was going to do a just brief check-in with my dad. So how do I get my dad's attention? Well, like most dads, they like to help. So I took the chain off my bike and dragged it into the garage because I'd heard he was working under the car. And I called out, Pops, can you come help me put the chain back on my bike? I'm going cycling with my friends. And he being my dad, rolled out. I could still see it in my mind's eye as if it was yesterday. He rolled out from under the car and he looked up at me quizzically and he said, Zandy, of all people, you fully know how to put the chain back on your bike. So get the work done and get out there and enjoy your time with your friends. I was crushed. I just wanted to connect with my dad and he didn't want to connect with me. My mind was allowing my brain to interpret that this was rejection from my dad, right? But this is what my dad taught me by showing faith in my skills. He essentially said, you don't need to be helpless. You're not helpless. And he affirmed me for my capacity. So in that meeting with those executives, I shared that story and I said, listen, just affirm the capacity and capabilities of your team. And what you'll find is the more you do it, the more they will trust themselves and trust you as they move forward and try and continue to have the work ethic that they've always had. So learned helplessness is one of the problems that happens in our brain when our resilience is eroded. So be mindful of it. And again, the trick is to focus on your capacity to keep learning and to keep growing, and also past successes. And when you can affirm other people for theirs, you will get them out of the trap of learned helplessness. So that takes us to tip number 2. Take back some control. Now, control is an illusion. I totally get that. But the perception that you're capable actually creates that feeling of having some control, some certainty. And to do that, you want to develop some self-regulation. Now, interestingly, self-regulation is in the curriculum for kindergarten because the psychologists that have been part of the learning models and coming up with them know that human development requires, we perform at a much higher level if we've developed self-regulation skills. So resilience really calls on it. So I played with my cycling story and Marty Seligman's research, where he talks about breaking the cycle of learned helplessness through self-regulation. So there's 3 steps to it. So if you're going to choose to work on this tip, make note of these 3 steps. First, establish guidelines, standards, desired outcomes. Much like my friend in Spain sat down and wrote down what it was that he was feeling, what he needed to do about it. He set some standards for himself, and he was already on the road to feeling better about it. Then develop some metrics to track your progress on moving that forward. And thirdly, revisit to see how you're doing against those metrics, and then adjust how you're approaching it to expand your agency, right? So I could have put this as a circle, because once you've revisited and adjusted to expand agency, you go back to establishing the guidelines based on this revisit, and then developing metrics, and all the way. It's a constant circle, and it can be on the same issues or on every other issue, and you can have constant circles going on that develop self-regulation. Then, of course, specific observable behavior. To be resilient, you need, I've already said, you need to observe with your mind, but you also need to know what to observe. So you can do this last tip together with these. You can do all of these together, or you can do them all separately. I, in fact, encourage you to pick one and practice it and get good at it before moving to another one. And you can start on any one of them. And with specific observable behaviors, I always love this, because when I used to teach leaders who were moving up in companies back about 25 years ago, I created curriculum, and I loved testing the curriculum and going out and working with these leaders. And I'd put up on the screen, we're going to get a hold of our SOBs. And of course, that not only got humor, got laughter, but it also had people intrigued. What are we getting a hold of here? And here's the interesting thing I learned over and over and over again, that we get in our own way. We make bigger problems than are necessary by jumping to conclusions. That social brain that we have is really, really adept at drawing conclusions and getting to conclusions. And the unfortunate thing is those conclusions cloud our judgment and our mind and our ability to see things clearly. I always encourage people to step back from the conclusions and find the specific observable behaviors, because conclusions cloud while specific observable behaviors inform us. So here's a quick story from the classroom. One exercise that I had them do is I asked them to, together we'd choose 3 people. I was always one of those 3 people. People they all knew and had observed some. And I would ask them to come up with 3 specific observable behaviors and 1 conclusion that those behaviors identified or drew them to. And it never failed. Every single table of 8 in every single classroom where I worked on this with them, they all jumped to conclusions. In fact, all 4 of the things on their list were conclusions. And so I needed to figure out how to help them see that, because it isn't worthwhile if I just say, hey, wrong, you got a conclusion. It's not a specific observable behavior. So I asked myself, what do I do when I'm trying to figure out if I'm drawing a conclusion about someone or about myself, or if I'm taking feedback someone gave me and I'm feeling bad about it or great about it? How do I know I can replicate or stop doing the things that they're giving me feedback on? And that is to get at the SOBs through questions. So what I would do is, I'll give you an example. So one of the things, the conclusions that most people, most classes at least had 1 or 2 tables would say, well, Rox, we think that you're unapproachable. You're a little intimidating. We're a little afraid to talk with you in the hallways. Yikes, that's not good, but it was a conclusion. So here are some of the questions that I would ask to help them use their mind to reframe faulty conclusions, which is the 3rd tip. Use your mind to reframe the conclusions you're drawing. First thing I'd say to them in the classroom, so what tells you that I'm intimidating? What tells you that I am unapproachable as I walk down the hall, right? And I also would ask them, what do you see in me and how I behave that leads you to believe that? And I would get answers like, well, whenever you're going to meetings and we see you leave your office, you're always looking like you're on a mission, like you're charging ahead. When you talk to people, you speak in declaratives. So we're not able to feel comfortable with you. Well, that was way more meaningful to me. I could do something with that information. It was specific and observable. Telling me I was intimidating, I knew I was a sweetheart. And once people got to know me, they would know that too. But how could they get to know me if they thought I was intimidating? So here are 2 more questions you can use if you want to better understand whether you're falling into the trap of drawing conclusions or if you can look at specific observable behaviors. Hi, Nermina, I see you joined us. There's, how do I know that to be true? That's a good question to ask yourself. Before you jump to a conclusion about another person, how do I know that to be true? And that's what I did with my sister in the story I told earlier. I started to ask myself, how do I know that she is really being hostile towards me? How do I know that she's being dismissive of me? It's how I feel, but is that really what she's doing, or am I interpreting it that way? And a final question that you could use is, how can I describe this differently to understand what I see or think in this moment? So those 4 questions can really help you identify how you can reframe faulty conclusions. And imagine if you do this, how it becomes a learning opportunity rather than a judgment opportunity. And resilient people turn difficult situations into learning opportunities. And when they feel bad, they think, what is it that I can learn here? And that is always going to keep you in a more resilient, forward-moving place. So when I, one of the things I did when I learned that feedback from those leaders, that I was intimidating and that I would charge down the hall, and be very tunnel vision as I was on my way to a meeting. I learned to invite people to walk with me. If someone looked like they were curious to talk to me, I'd say, you know, I'm on my way to a meeting. Why don't you walk with me? And when people started seeing me going, walking down the hall, chatting away with people and listening to them and engaged with them, it changed the way they interpreted that same action. I was still getting to a meeting, but they were walking with me. So I am inviting you right now to walk with me, as I do all my clients, walk with me. And today in 3 steps, we're going to do one of the steps today, and then I'm going to ask you to do the second within the next 24 hours on your own, and then in 72. Because we know in the neuroscience that if you're going to embed any kind of learning that's going to stick with you after today, you need to do these 3 things. You need to do something today, something in 24 hours, and something in 72. So I've got an assignment for you. So Narmina is about to put, or Narmina, sorry, Aldine is about to put you in your separate groups. And I'm going to ask that you identify with each other. You're going to get 1.5 minutes each, so 3 minutes total, to share what it is you want to think more about or practice. Because it's not about just learning it, it's about putting it into practice. So share the key points with the person you're paired with, and then find one other person between now and the end of the day to also share it with. So let's put people in groups now, Aldine, so that we can give them a chance to share with each other.
Sounds good. So I'm going to, I think we're down to, okay, perfect. So we'll put them into 1 to 2.
Groups of 2 if possible, yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So we'll do 2, and then I'll create the rooms. Oh, Rox, look at that. You're the odd man out. So I am going to hop into your room.
Oh, okay.
All right. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and do that.
Hey, I'm here.